Hey folks, a lot of you have asked me to do short explainers about things that are happening in the news, and I've kind of put it off, but something somebody said to me recently meant to me that I needed to start. And that was that someone said that only rich people could afford to vote for Democrats because Donald Trump was the person who would help the little guy. And to put that in context, you have to understand a little bit about the way that approaches to the American economy have changed in our lifetimes, really since the 1930s or since the post-World War II era in the 1940s and the 1950s. And that is that after the Great Depression was really underway, starting in about 1933, Democratic President Franklin Delano Roosevelt changed the American government from simply supporting the protection of property to trying to invest in ordinary Americans, trying to regulate business and to create a tax structure that meant that wealthy people paid more money so that there would be social services in order to make things better in the economy for people who were in the middle class or people who were just starting out. So between 1933 and 1981, presidents of both parties, Democrats and Republicans, both used the government to invest in the middle class or in people just starting out. And there was a philosophy behind that. The idea was that if the government regulated business, provided a basic social safety net, promoted the kinds of industries and infrastructure that would enable people to have good paying jobs, that they would consume a lot and that is what would make the economy grow. Now, the issue with that is that a lot of that was paid for with taxation. And the way that that worked was that there were different tax brackets. And what that meant is if you earned a certain amount of money, you paid a certain kind of tax. But if you made more money than that, that extra money was taxed at a higher rate. And similarly through a whole bunch of different brackets. So that the more money you made, the more of those brackets you would be in, and the higher you would be taxed. And beginning in 1981, people who felt that those taxes were too high began to argue that that idea of investing in ordinary Americans was a waste of money. That what it meant was that wealthy people couldn't invest in the economy efficiently like they could if the government stayed out of regulation or stopped taxing them. And so that the best way to make the economy grow was for the government to stop regulating business and to stop taxing people in different wealth brackets at higher amounts, and to stop investing in social welfare programs, and to stop promoting infrastructure and factories and so on that would provide good paying jobs, because all of that was inefficient. And so they pushed an ideology that said that what the government really should do is get out of the business of regulating the economy or providing a basic social safety net or protecting workers or any of those things, because you wanted money to concentrate upward, because people who had money would then invest more efficiently. And that would make the economy grow even more quickly than it had before. And that would enable everybody to move up even faster, that it was supposed to be good for everybody. Between 1981 and 2021, that's the argument that Republicans especially made about the US government. But the trick was that actually never really promoted economic growth in any way above what had happened before that period. What it did do is it took about $50 trillion with a T from the bottom 90% of Americans and transferred them to the top 1%. All right. So when Joe Biden got into office in 2021, he said, no, we're not going to do that any longer. We're not gonna just concentrate money at the top, because what it's done is it's put a whole lot of people into really precarious economic circumstances. And as a result, they don't believe in democracy anymore. So he said, we're going to go back to that old system, the system that we had between 1933 and 1981. And we're going to invest in ordinary Americans. And that's why we got, for example, the American Rescue Plan, which made sure that the pandemic did not destroy small businesses. It enabled them to move forward into the post-pandemic period. And that's why we got the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act that was designed to rebuild our roads and our bridges and our ports and our airports, but also to guarantee that people got decent paying jobs. This is why he worked so hard to support organized labor, walked on a picket line, for example. And this is why we got the Chips and Science Act, which invested a whole lot of money in government money, taxpayer money, to attract other private investment to create new factories that would build silicon chips, for example, that there's just been a huge one announced in Texas that would provide people with good and well-paying jobs. Okay, so think about what that did. What that said to those people who had made bank in the previous 40 years was that we must stop this system. And that's why you heard so much from Trump and the Republicans about how the economy was terrible. In fact, Joe Biden's economy was the best in the world. We had the lowest unemployment that we've had since the 1960s. If you were in the bottom 80% of American business, American workers, your wages increased faster than the rate of inflation, which was high, but it was high all over the world after the pandemic for a number of different reasons. It was lower in the US than anywhere else, and it has come down to the normal rate of about 2%. At the same time, the stock market also boomed, hitting all kinds of record prices, record amounts, because that system works as it did between 1933 and 1981. So this idea that that government did not work was an attempt to put back in place the system that we had between 1981 and 2021. And that's the idea that what the government really should do is it should not regulate business, it should not protect workers, it should not provide a basic social safety net, it should not invest in infrastructure, because all of those things will prevent a very few people from concentrating their wealth so that they can invest in ways that theoretically will be more efficient and will make the economy grow more quickly. So what you're seeing now with the election of Donald Trump as president was the attempt of the richest man in the world, that's Elon Musk, is worth more than $330 billion and who invested in Trump's campaign $132 million of cash, plus the in-kind donation of X, the use of his social media site, plus a super PAC that ran misleading ads in key counties. What you're seeing is now this idea of this old system from 1981 to 2021. It's actually called neoliberalism, if you care, or supply side economics, is we're going to see that again, but we're going to see it on steroids, because now, of course, Musk does not need the federal government for anything and has vowed to cut $2 trillion out of the budget, which is would basically get rid of all the discretionary spending of the US budget. And a lot of people are saying that can't happen. That's what he has said he's going to do. And the first thing that they have looked at cutting actually is veterans' health benefits. Again, not clear that that will go through, but it's a different way of looking at the economy. And there's a really great example of this that was in the news in mid-November. And that was that the Biden administration passed a rule that said that if you made between, and these are approximate, $35,000 and about $49,000, that your employer had to pay you overtime if you worked extra hours if you were in that income bracket, because what was possible under the Trump administration, who set the $35,000 limit, was that if you made more than that, that you could be considered a salaried employee and therefore you could be forced to work extra hours without getting paid. The Biden administration raised that to be about $49,000, so that if you worked between $35,000 and $49,000, your employer would have to pay you overtime if you worked extra hours. Well, in mid-November, a Trump-appointed judge said the government can't do that, so that anybody who's in that bracket from $39,000 to about $49,000 now can be considered salaried and can't be considered eligible for overtime. A place where it would certainly seem to me that's not good for people who make in that income bracket between 35,000 and 50,000 or 49,000. But that's again something that voters have to decide. But this idea that somehow it's the Democrats who are against working people and the Republicans who are for them is, I think, illuminated a little bit by these two very different philosophies. Should the government invest in ordinary people with the idea that expanding their purchasing power supports the economy as well as making their lives better? Or should the government say, no, we want to concentrate wealth among a very few people because they will invest more efficiently in the economy? So there is my quick explainer about the way that the American economy has worked since for about 100 years and the ideologies behind it. So when we look at things going forward in the next administration, you can decide for yourselves, is this part of an ideology that says invest in ordinary people, or is it part of an ideology that says invest in people at the very top? And which one of those do you think is better for you? Thanks for being here.